It's not your imagination. The Biden administration really is attacking your constitutional rights. That's this week on Come On Now. It's been an eventful week in the area of constitutional rights, and it's not your imagination. If you think things are getting worse in this country, you're right. Inflation is up. The border is still in utter chaos. Oh, and by the way, the people who are coming across the border illegally, they're not being tested for COVID. We're seeing COVID cases on the rise. Maybe the border instability has something to do with that. While all of this is going on, the Biden administration has launched attacks on your constitutional rights, especially your right to speak out. About 10 days ago, White House spokesperson Jen Psaki admitted that the Biden White House is working with social media platforms to effectively throttle free speech. What they're doing is going after content that they claim is problematic and that is, quote, killing people, in Joe Biden's words, when it comes to COVID and the vaccines. When pressed a little bit by the White House press corps on who they're talking about, they said, well, it's just a dozen people. It's the disinformation dozen. Now, they got the list of those dozen from a very shadowy group that's a dark money group. Very few people even know who this group is or what their agenda is. But it's this group that came up with this disinformation dozen, one of whom, by the way, is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Now, not to defend him at all. He's a loon when it comes to vaccines and other issues, and he's a hypocrite on environmental issues. But it should have been bigger news that the President of the United States, a Democrat, is accusing another Democrat, son of an aristocracy, a Kennedy, of killing people, which is what Biden actually did. The White House has been pressed a little bit further by the hapless White House press corps on the issue. And then Kate Bedingfield, who is the communications director at the White House. By the way, we don't see a lot of her, which is interesting. We see Psaki, but not Bedingfield so much. Bedingfield actually gave an interview to Mika Brzezinski at MSNBC and said this.
Well, we're reviewing that, and certainly they should be held accountable. And I think you've heard the president speak very aggressively about this. He understands this is an important piece of the ecosystem. But it's also the other thing the president has pointed out and spoke to when he was asked about this yesterday is it is also the responsibility of the people creating the content. And again, I would go back to, there are conservative news outlets who are creating irresponsible content that's sharing misinformation about the virus that's getting shared on these platforms.
So did you catch the sleight of hand that Bedingfield engaged in there? She's not exactly Penn and Teller, is she? She expanded the target list from the disinformation dozen to unnamed conservative news outlets and then didn't bother to provide what kind of content they have a problem with. The problem they have is probably us and others like us who are conservatives who question what they do. In this country, that is called freedom. We have the First Amendment, the freedom of speech. And it was put in the Constitution to stop people like Joe Biden and his little minion there, Kate Bedingfield. They're attacking the First Amendment. That is what this is. Now, Joe Biden is not content just to attack the First Amendment. Last week, he did a town hall with CNN, which is one of his favorite networks. They're not likely to let any hostile questioning get through, and they didn't. And he didn't really stand up to even the softballs that he got. He short-circuited once or twice. Here's one of those.
That's underway, just like the other question that's illogical. And I've heard you speak about it because I'm not being solicitous, but you're always straight up about what you're doing. And the question is whether or not we should be in a position where you are, why can't the experts say, we know that this virus is in fact it's going to be, or excuse me, we know why all the drugs approved are not temporarily approved but permanently approved. Yeah. That's underway too. I expect that to occur quickly.
Well, that means you mean for the FDA?
For the FDA. Yeah.
That guy has his finger on the button. Don't you feel good? When he wasn't losing his train of thought in the middle of, trying to keep a train of thought, he attacked the Second Amendment. He was asked a softball question about what he would do on the rising crime in this country. Now, I'll get to why crime is rising after the clip, but first I want to play the clip. He's asked a softball question and he spews a bunch of lies and nonsense.
So how will you address gun violence from a federal point of view to actually bring about change and make our local cities safer?
Now, I'm not being a wise guy. There's no reason you should. Have you seen my gun violence legislation I've introduced? As you know, because you're so involved, actually crime is down. Gun violence and murder rates are up. guns. I'm the only guy that ever got passed legislation when I was a senator to make sure we eliminated assault weapons. The idea you need a weapon that can have the ability to fire 20, 30, 40, 50, 120 shots from that weapon, whether it's a 9mm pistol or whether it's a rifle, is ridiculous. I'm continuing to push to eliminate the sale of those things, but I'm not likely to get that done in the near term. So here's what I've done. The people who, in fact, are using those weapons are acquiring them illegally. And so what happens is I've gotten ATF, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. I have them increase their budget and increase their capacity, along with the Justice Department, to go after the gun shops that are not abiding by the law of doing background checks. For real, that's number one. Number two, we're in a position where most of the cities, and I don't know enough, I think you've had a lot of gun violence here in Cincinnati. I think it was up to what, how many dead? 500 over a period? Don't hold me to the number, whatever it was. But my point is all across the country. And it's not because the gun shops in the cities are selling these guns. They are either shadow gun dealers and or gun shops that are not abiding by the law. So we're going to do major investigations and shut those guys down and put some of them in jail for what they're doing, selling these weapons. There's also a thing called ghost guns that are being sold now and being used. And so, but in addition to that, what we have to do is we have to deal with the larger problem of the whole issue of law enforcement generally. We're in a situation where, as much as we need to pass the Floyd Act and all that, but here's the deal. Cops are having real trouble. They're not all bad guys. There are a lot of good guys. We need more policemen, not fewer policemen. But we need them involved in community policing. Community policing. And when we did that, violent crime went down. All the criticism about the original crime bill, guess what? Yeah. Crime went down until we stopped doing community policing. So it's about we have availability now of over lots of money for cops to be able to hire psychologists, psychiatrists, as well as social workers to be engaged in the process.
Joe Biden says a lot of things, most of which don't make any sense. He talks about the rise in violence and homicides across this country and then makes this straw man leap to blame guns. Well, it's not guns that are they're not getting up and walking around. They're not of their own free will or volition going and shooting anyone. What's happening is criminals are emboldened. Why did that happen? How did that happen? Members of Joe Biden's own party turned against police last year, and they defunded police in Austin, in Minneapolis, in Seattle, in New York, all over the country. And wherever they did this, crime has gone up. In Austin, for instance, homicides are up 53%. Austin led the nation by percentage in defunding the police. Austin also has a radical district attorney by the name of Jose Garza, who lets criminals out without a whole lot of regard for the effect they're going to have on the public. This is happening all over the country wherever these radical Democrat district attorneys have been elected. Biden never addresses that at all. The best thing he says in that clip is that we need more police officers. He's right about that. That's one of the few things he did get right, but he needs to address why we have a shortage now. And the responsibility for that is his own party. They defunded the police. There are still Democrats out there in Congress, the Squad for instance, who want to defund the police. And when they're asked about it, they will say, yes, defunding the police means defunding the police. They're not shy about it. Biden has to address that as the leader of his own party. Now, other things he said in that clip that are worth noting, he is going after 9mm handguns. He said that. Now, he tried to limit it by saying those that fire 20 or 30 rounds. Most 9mm handguns don't fire that many rounds, or at least they don't have magazines that will hold that many rounds, but some do. And that's an arbitrary limit he's putting on the Second Amendment, which courts have ruled over and over and over again is a sacrosanct civil right in this country. Biden doesn't believe that. What he believes is you don't have the right to speak out against him. He's attacking the First Amendment. He also believes you don't have the right to defend yourself and your family from criminals. His party believes criminals should be put on the street and you might be put behind bars or lose your freedom of speech because you say things he doesn't like. This administration is a menace to your constitutional rights. If you didn't see this coming, though, come on now. Joe Biden signaled who he has been for decades. This is not new. The only new thing now is that he's in power. I'm Bryan Preston.